Hello, everyone. We can please all take our seats. Thank you. Close the doors in the back. Hello, and thank you for joining us this evening for a special foreign policy debate hosted by the Middle East Forum and our friends and co-sponsors at the Jewish Federation of Greater Philadelphia, the Jewish Community Relations Council, the Israeli American Council, the Republican Jewish Coalition, and the Jewish Democratic Council of America. My name is Matthew Bennett, and I am the Senior Development Officer for the Middle East Forum. MEF is a foreign policy think tank founded in 1994 by Daniel Pike in the Middle East and protect Western values from Middle Eastern threats. This evening, we'll hear opposing viewpoints on a variety of issues related to Middle East and U.S. foreign relations, national security strategies, and America's role in the world stage. Please be respectful of the speakers and the moderator. This evening's event is being live streamed on Facebook and on YouTube. Now, please welcome MEF board member David Edmond to the stage to introduce our moderator and our speakers.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's my pleasure, again, my name is David Edmond, and it's my pleasure as a board member of the Middle East Forum to welcome you tonight to this important discussion on foreign policy. The Middle East Forum has long been committed to advancing American interests and safeguarding Western values, especially in today's complex geopolitical landscape. This evening, we're pleased to partner with the Israeli American Council and the Jewish Community Relations Council to bring forward a substantial discussion on America's strategic role in the Middle East. I'm going to keep the introductions short. Each of you saw more detailed bios on the speakers in the publicity material, but our two distinguished speakers are first Haile Soifer, CEO of the Jewish Democratic Council of America. Notably, she was previously National Security Advisor to then Senator Harris. And our other speaker representing the Republican Jewish Coalition is Congressman Peter Deutsch. And Peter spent 12 years in the U.S. House of Representatives, involved deeply in these issues. Moderating tonight's discussion is Jennifer Sutton, Executive Director of the Council for a Secure America, whose experience will guide this timely and essential conversation. As we approach the November elections, clarity on the contrasting visions of U.S. foreign policy is crucial. The pressing challenges we face in the Middle East, ranging from regional stability to the strength of international alliances, require both clear understanding and decisive responses. Tonight's debate will shed light on these pivotal issues through a robust exchange of ideas and policy perspectives. So at this time, I'd like to invite our two speakers and moderator to the podium. Jennifer, you may want to stay because I'm going to invite you right to the. Oh, you got a mic, so I don't.
I think we're all set.
I'm pleased to hand over the floor to Jennifer Sutton.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone, and thank you to our host, the Middle East Forum, our distinguished sponsors, the Jewish Community Relations Council of the Jewish Federation of Greater Philadelphia, the Israeli American Council, the RJC, the JDCA, and the Weizmann Museum of American Jewish History. We gather here today at a crossroads, 390 days into the Israel-Hamas war since the tragic event of October 7th, and 1 week before a pivotal election. As our nation faces consequential decisions at the ballot box, we are honored to host two esteemed speakers and foreign policy experts. Coincidentally, they happen to both be Democrats, former Congressman Peter Deutsch and Haile Soifer. Given that we are tight on time, I've taken the liberty of cutting some of their bios short, my apologies, and then in spirit of brevity. Congressman Deutsch is an American lawyer and former U.S. Congressman who served from 1993 to 2005. During his time in Congress, he served as the ranking member of the Subcommittee in Oversight and Investigations of Energy and Commerce. Currently, the Congressman resides in Renana, Israel with his family, though he maintains strong ties to Florida and continues to be involved in various political and educational initiatives. Congressman Deutsch is here representing the Trump campaign's foreign policy positions on behalf of the RJC. Haile Soifer. Since 2018, Haile has been the executive director and CEO of the JDCA, the Jewish Democratic Council for America. Prior to that, Haile served for nearly 2 decades as a national security advisor to 4 members of Congress, both as a senior foreign policy advisor in the Obama administration and as a foreign policy expert and civil servant. Most recently, Haile was a national security advisor to then Senator Kamala Harris of California. And before that, she served for 2 years in the Obama administration as senior policy advisor to U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Samantha Power. Haile is here today representing the Harris campaign's foreign policy position and the JDCA. So before we begin, I'm going to flip a coin, heads or tails, and that will determine who is going to go first, and I'll go through all of the rules of engagement momentarily. So with that, heads. Tails. Don't mind my lack of sports expertise. This is Jewish education and science. So going forward, our debaters will examine 2 divergent paths for America's role in the Middle East and explore how these choices echo across our nation as we face mounting threats and anti-Semitism. Through their discourse, we must decide how to uphold our values both at home and abroad. Their insights will help navigate us through the interplay between American foreign policy decisions and their implications for global and domestic stability. So please join me in welcoming our esteemed experts and debaters. The most important part of this discussion, the rules. So we have our timekeeper, Brett Goldman, over here in the front row. You can see with his clock. The order was just decided by a coin toss. Our first speaker will be Congressman Deutsch. After that, each speaker will be given 3 minutes for opening remarks. This will be followed by a moderated discussion with 2-minute response windows. Equal speaking time is guaranteed, and we will keep to a strict time. There will be no interruptions from the audience, from our speakers, and I will guide the group through questions on key policy areas and follow-ups as needed. Can you both acknowledge the rules as I've laid them out for you? Okay, so we begin. All right, let's get to the heart of it. Congressman Deutsch, how would you characterize your candidate's record for the U.S.-Israel relationship over the next 4 years and what that looks like?
So I think that every person in this room, every American, as in deciding who to vote for, is thinking about issues that are important to them and helping them make that decision. For me, the most important issue is the most important responsibility for the president is to achieve and maintain peace in the world. If we look at the 4 years of the Trump administration, we literally had peace, we had no wars, we had prosperity. We look at the 4 years of the Harris-Biden administration, we literally have wars, death, and destruction. And I think there's some specific policy issues that have driven the 2 dramatic differences. The one issue I think that drives so many others is the completely divergent policies towards Iran. In the Trump administration, Iran's funding was effectively cut the first day that Donald Trump was there. And by the end of 4 years, as President Trump talked about in the debate, they were effectively bankrupt. They did not have the ability to fund their terrorist proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. The Biden administration, effectively the first day they got there, changed that policy. And basically, in the last 4 years, Iran has effectively received at least $100 billion, where they have taken that money and directly given it to terrorist organizations who, in fact, have killed Americans, killed Israelis, and killed other foreign nationals. Another significant part of the difference is really the commitment to use American force when necessary. I mean, President Trump ordered the elimination of General Soleimani. As a senator, at the time, Senator Harris, in her own words, condemned that action, said it was a mistake. Since then, the Harris-Biden administration has shown that they are effectively, there have been 24 direct attacks on American naval vessels by the Houthis. There's been no response. Those types of not willing to use force effectively invites more horrific activities. As we move forward, I think there are two differences, and we'll get into more detail about this. In terms of moving forward, I think you have two candidates. One candidate has effectively given money to people that want to kill your family, and in fact have killed your family. There's another candidate that for 4 years protected your family and literally kept the world safe. And that's a choice that I think voters have, and I think that's the policy difference in those two significant areas.
Thank you, Congressman. Haley.
Thank you. I'm proud to join you today in support of Kamala Harris. This election presents the American people with the starkest contrast in our lifetime between two presidential candidates. Kamala Harris is a defender of democracy at home and abroad, and Donald Trump has attacked our democracy. He admires and aligns with dictators, past and present, and he has an isolationist worldview. He has pledged to be a dictator on day one. And while today's debate is focused on Middle East policy, I begin with democracy because it is the #1 issue for Jewish voters in this election, just as it was the #1 issue for Jewish voters in the last election, and it is very much on the ballot. We cannot support our democratic allies, including Israel, if we are no longer a democracy ourselves. Kamala Harris has been a long-standing ally of the Jewish community in the face of rising anti-Semitism, while Donald Trump has emboldened anti-Semites and dangerous right-wing extremists. We saw that on full display just on Sunday at Madison Square Garden. He's trafficked in anti-Semitic rhetoric. He's denigrated millions of us on the campaign trail, and he's scapegoated the Jewish people as responsible for a potential election loss, which is definitionally anti-Semitic. And on Israel, Kamala Harris is a staunch and unwavering supporter of the U.S.-Israel relationship, which I saw firsthand when I had the honor and privilege of working for her for 2 years and traveling with her to Israel. We visited Iron Dome batteries, and I witnessed her deep commitment to the U.S.-Israel security relationship and military assistance. Since October 7th, she has repeatedly provided assurances that she will always give Israel the ability to defend itself. She's made good on her commitment with actions, providing more military assistance this year to Israel than any past year in U.S. history, and not once but twice deployed the U.S. military to defend Israel against a direct Iranian attack. While Donald Trump's policy toward Israel is best summarized by his former National Security Advisor, John Bolton, who has repeatedly said that Donald Trump's support of Israel is not guaranteed in a second term, and those who believe he will be instinctively supportive of Israel should think again. One need look no further than this very museum in which we find ourselves today to understand the irreparable damage caused by Nazi generals whom Donald Trump apparently wishes were his own. So it's fitting that we're having our discussion here. The history of the Jewish people as memorialized in this museum requires us to do better than an aspiring dictator like Donald Trump, and we have a chance to do so 1 week from now. So tonight, you'll hear from Peter that we should overlook what Donald Trump has said, what he's done, what he stands for because of his alleged support of Israel, and I look forward to explaining why that argument is deeply flawed and antithetical to our interests and our values.
Okay, well that's a lot to unpack on both fronts. So before we get to the heart of this, first off, thank you both for your opening statements. As a reminder, Brett is keeping the time and we are going to keep to strict time limits. Let's start with Congressman Deutsch, and we can offer follow-ups as we go along, and there's plenty to unpack from both of these opening statements. So we are 390 days in Israel, officially, into the Israel-Hamas war, and Israel finds itself in a war that neither started nor saw. What does your candidate see as the optimal outcome for the Israel-Hamas conflict. And again, by Israel-Hamas conflict, just for argument's sake, I just want to clarify that includes regional conflicts with Iran, with the other proxies like Lebanon and the Houthis, etc. So when I say Israel-Hamas war, just keep that in mind. And how does this outcome align with Israel's long-term security objectives? Do you see a difference?
So let me, and I'm going to get to that, but I feel compelled to respond to Haile's opening statement. Not almost everything that she has stated has been debunked. I mean, for calling Donald Trump an anti-Semite, and you and I have talked about this before. Kamala Harris, when she was inaugurated, one of the pastors who gave the prayer at the inauguration is a known anti-Semite. She has met with multiple anti-Semites. We can go name after name. I brought a bunch of names if we want to go through that. Not just names of other people, like the woman that set up the Women's March on Washington, who was forced to resign because of her anti-Semitic comment, but at least 4 incumbent Democratic congresspeople who are anti-Semites, who she meets with on a regular basis. I don't call Kamala Harris an anti-Semite. I don't think she is an anti-Semite, but I think that it's just it doesn't make sense based on fact. Donald Trump was president for 4 years. As far as I can tell, as far as I remember, he wasn't a dictator. I mean, when that is stated, the reality is, what's the path to dictator? I mean, he said, and he's on tape saying, "I'll be a dictator for a day." In Bob Woodward's book that I just finished, at one point Donald Trump said he's going to change the insignia on American planes and put Chinese insignias on those planes, and he's going to attack Russia, so Russia and China are going to have a war. I mean, how seriously can you take that? I mean, that's who he is in terms of those issues. Anti-Semitism at Madison Square Garden. I spent 8 hours at Madison Square Garden. I think the lesson of Madison Square Garden is that the mainstream media hates Donald Trump, doesn't want him to get elected, and will write and say anything to prevent him from being elected. I was there. There were no Nazis there. There were blacks, Jews, Hispanics. There were Israeli flags. There was Jews dancing outside of it. To make that accusation defies the reality of what happened at that time.
So each of you I'm making up my own rules right now. We're each going to get one pass not to answer the question. So you got one. Haile, you get the chance to do that as well. But I implore you guys, if you have questions that I know that the audience and NEF really want to hear from. So I urge you all to answer the question. You each get one pass. Congressman, your pass just came. Haile, if you want to answer the question, I'm happy to repeat it.
Sure, you could repeat the question.
Sure.
I mean, I feel like I need to answer what Congressman has said, but sure, please repeat the question.
Okay. I promise there'll be a way to answer and infuse all of these arguments in upcoming questions, so don't feel like this is the only chance to answer them. All right. So essentially the question is about what the optimal outcome is for the Israel-Hamas conflict and how does it align with Israel's long-term security objectives. Do you see a difference in how that yields? In your particular case, the Vice President has really pushed for a ceasefire. What would that look like?
So immediately following the horrific acts of October 7th, Kamala Harris has unequivocally denounced, condemned the horrific acts of terror that we saw on that day. She has pledged to provide Israel with anything that it needs to ensure its security and its defense, and she's made good on that pledge with $17.8 billion in military assistance provided to Israel in the past year, and as I mentioned, twice deploying the U.S. military in light of the unprecedented Iranian attacks. Days after October 7th, we also heard from Donald Trump. On October 11th in Florida, Donald Trump was mocking the Israeli government, and he praised Hezbollah as very smart. He subsequently said that U.S. foreign aid should be made into loans without specifying any sort of loan or any sort of exception. And it caused alarm on the right, which is what led John Bolton to say, Donald Trump's support of Israel is not guaranteed in the second term because Donald Trump does not do anything based on a coherent foreign policy. He only does what's good for Donald Trump. That was really exemplified on the debate stage when Donald Trump said that Israel's existence, its survival, is contingent on his election win. Israel's survival should not be contingent on anyone's political aspirations. Yet that is the policy that he articulated on the debate stage while Kamala Harris yet again provided her view and her commitment to Israel's security and right to self-defense.
Can I respond?
Are we just going to keep going back and forth?
I'm asking what the format is.
I think the format right now is we're going to get through some of these questions and we'll do follow-ups and you guys can use
I answered the question.
Well, let me follow up with both of you individually. So, Haile, in the case of Vice-President Harris calling for a ceasefire right now, and we're going to get to the hostage conversation momentarily because that's on many people's mind, how does that reconcile with Israel's long-term security objectives?
So I wouldn't characterize it as the vice president calling for a ceasefire. Months ago, when this administration got involved in trying to ensure a continuation of the release of hostages, of course we saw the release of over 100 hostages in November, they started calling for a temporary ceasefire that would ensure the release of all of the hostages as well as the continuation of humanitarian aid into Gaza. And we have seen negotiations attempted and failed. And this administration has been quite clear. Kamala Harris is clear that the threat posed by Hamas must be eliminated. She is clear-eyed about the threat that is posed by Hamas, and she is also deeply committed to Israel's security and its right to self-defense, which is why this administration continues to provide Israel with the defense, with its ability to defend itself, including recently deploying a very advanced missile system accompanied by U.S. troops to ensure that Israel has the ability to defend itself. So that continues to be her commitment, and it would continue if she were elected president.
Congressman Deutsch, thank you very much, Haile. One of the conversations right now was that President Trump has indicated that Israel would cease to exist. That was a comment that he made if he does not win this election. How do you respond to that?
I think
You're a resident of Vermont.
Right, okay, unfortunately, I think the stakes are that high. When 200 ballistic missiles were sent to Israel a short time ago, Iran has made clear that they want to put nuclear weapons on those ballistic missiles. And those nuclear weapons are not just being directed at Israel, their aspirations direct them towards the United States. I don't think we can get to any more existential threat than that. When you have an administration where literally sometimes it's hard to tell whether Kamala Harris directly and the Harris-Biden administration views Iran, whose side are they on? Are they side of Iran or side of the United States? I mean, she has continuously talked about bilateral choices. There are no bilateral choices in terms of who's right here. So who's going to stop that from happening? Someone that's giving Iran hundreds of billions of dollars where they can continue their efforts, who view Iran as the enemy. The only reason that it appears that Israel did not retaliate against Iran's nuclear site is because the Harris-Biden administration prevented them from doing it. President Trump was the exact opposite. Publicly, he stated that that's exactly what Israel should have done, and unfortunately, I believe that's what Israel should have done. So I would actually agree with President Trump that Israel's existential existence is on the ballot in a week from now. I hope I'm wrong, but I believe it's an accurate statement.
Thank you. You mentioned the hostages. Haile, there are 101 hostages still being held in captivity in Gaza, including 4 American citizens, and the safe return of those hostages remains paramount. What specific steps would your candidate take to facilitate their release while bringing this conflict to a close?
Kamala Harris has repeatedly called for a release of all the hostages, met with the hostage family, and demonstrated great empathy in the aftermath of the horrific execution of Hersh Goldberg Poland and the 5 other hostages quite recently. We heard directly from her about the pain, and I actually was there when our second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, came to my synagogue, of which he is also a member, and spoke at a vigil. The empathy and the condolences and the commitment that they both have for ensuring the release of those hostages is quite evident. That is due in no small part to the commitment of this administration and Kamala Harris to ensuring your security and safety by deploying the U.S. military in advance of those strikes, moving carrier strike groups to the Eastern Mediterranean, not once but twice, and having the U.S. military, for the first time in U.S. history, deployed to defend Israel against a direct threat. In addition, you mentioned the aid, $17.8 billion and hundreds of military shipments sent to Israel. Was that done immediately? No. Why? Because Republicans delayed it for 6 months, and J.D. Vance voted against it twice.
So as a follow-up, Congressman Veteran momentarily, what are the specific steps that your candidate will take or has taken to get them home?
We have seen from this administration ongoing efforts to further negotiations. We saw this successfully happen, as I mentioned, in November. But now they have talked about potentially an opening in the aftermath of the killing of Sinwar, which we heard from the Vice President.
Or watching the live stream about this. Iran effectively had no reserves in their national budget at the end of the Trump administration. They have over $70 billion in how you view them. It's a fundamental difference. You can say it, and again, I know that Vice President must feel a weakness in her politics to say that Iran is not the biggest threat, to say that Iran is the biggest threat. I mean, it's almost like she was listening to what I was saying and listening to some of the debate. I mean, I'm not sure I would say that. Iran is, in terms of our response to Iran, because of the...
What would you say to critics right now who would say that pulling out of the JCPOA was a mistake? And what is on the table under a Trump administration?
Politics was when the JDCA was proposed by President Obama. I served as the co-chair of a national organization to try to fight it with Senator Wheaton. I think it was a tragic mistake at that point in time. It shifted how we view Iran as an enemy, as a state that really needs to be destroyed, or the policy that still exists to try to bring them into the family of nations. I literally feel that the approach of the Harris-Biden administration, there is such a parallel to what happened with Neville Chamberlain before World War II with the Nazis and with Hitler. Let's just be their friends, let's talk to them, let's bring them into the family of nations. As horrific as the results would have occurred if that policy was a success at JLPA, the facts don't support what she's saying. In terms of the enforcement mechanism, it was a disaster. President Trump made the right decision to stop it. It changed their ability to create terrorism, to create their nuclear program, and...
You have a few more seconds left. Go ahead.
It's fine.
All right. 5-second response to you. Do you believe that there would be military action on the table under a Trump administration?
I think any president that would take that off the table, it would be a tragic mistake. So I think it's on the table, but again, it's allowing Israel to do what Israel wants to do. Israel's hands have been handcuffed by the administration effectively since October 7th. Israeli soldiers would not have died had they been able to execute the war the way they wanted to. Every time Kamala Harris has opened up her mouth and talked about it, she talks about the suffering of the Palestinians. I care about the suffering of the Palestinians, the innocents, but just as Senator Fetterman has talked about, none of those innocents would be killed if it weren't for the actions of Hamas.
Thank you. All right, as I promised, guys, not to cut anyone off and excuse my manners, but I want to be very mindful, as I promised we would keep to strict time, so bear with me. All right, turning to domestic concerns, and we'll get back to Iran later. There's a whole war to talk about. We are witnessing an unprecedented surge in anti-Semitism across America. What concrete measures does your candidate propose to combat this rising tide? And again, you can talk about campus protests, about what has gone on in various anti-Semitic attacks around the country. The floor is yours, 2 minutes, Haile.
Well, since Peter mentioned the Nazis and Hitler, I think it is important that we acknowledge that one candidate has apparently told his former chief of staff that Hitler did some good things, that he aspired to have generals like those Nazi generals. And for those, I hear you, hissing, I encourage you. Instead, he encouraged the support Democrats. We have to have our head examined. We should be ashamed of ourselves. We don't love our religion. We don't love Israel. We're disloyal, which in and of itself is an anti-Semitic dual loyalty claim. He has repeatedly aligned with Holocaust deniers and right-wing extremists. He had Nick Fuentes, a neo-Nazi leader, to Mar-a-Lago. And let's not forget that when neo-Nazis marched in Charlottesville saying Jews will not replace us, echoing the great replacement theory that inspired the perpetrator of the worst attack here in Pennsylvania on American Jews in our history a year later, Donald Trump said there were very fine people on both sides. More recently, Donald Trump said that if he loses this election, which he will, that the Jewish people, all of you, all of us, would be to blame. Congressman Deutsch, if you need me to repeat the question, I'm happy.
No, I'm happy to respond that everything that she said has already been debunked. It's been debunked. Everyone in this room has a phone on them. They can, Scopes, which is a left-wing organization that does fact-checking. You can read the headline. No, Trump did not call neo-Nazis and white supremacists very fine people. He did not go on your phone. Go on your phone. Please, go on your phones. Okay, I am now, working as a surrogate for the campaign. I've spent time doing the fact checking. I've spent a couple of hours looking at this one particular issue. That's not what he said. This is Scopes is a left-wing fact-checking organization. What Haile just did is really unfortunate. She repeated a blood libel against Donald Trump. It's not the first blood libel. It won't be the last blood libel. Madison Square Garden was not Nazis. It was nothing as the Harris campaign sparked about. I was there for 8 hours. I have a list of people that Kamala Harris has met with who are anti-Semites. Nasrallah. You can go through a list. Juan Orlando Hernandez. She's met with these people. They're anti-Semites. She's not an anti-Semite. Sometimes maybe it makes sense to meet with people who you absolutely don't agree with, who you think are terrible people, and try to change their minds. We can look at what he's done, all right? Was he an anti-Semite while he was in office? I don't think so. In fact, he has done more, and he's talked about he's done more for the state of Israel probably than any other president. Both Democrat and Republican presidents would not move the embassy to Jerusalem. He did. That was a dramatic thing that he did. The Abraham Accord, the recognition of the Golan Heights, means it's not worthy of response.
I think what we're going to do right now, and I really, sorry to overemphasize this, guys, please keep your emotions and your reactions to yourself. I promise there'll be an opportunity in the reception afterwards to share your grievances or air your grievances, but we're not in an episode of Seinfeld, and this is not the best of it. So let's focus right now on maintaining the decorum and the respect of both of our speakers. I'm going to allow each speaker to allow 1 minute each. They can finish their points on anti-Semitism, but please, we have a lot of questions to get through. We have limited time, and reacting is only going to just prolong this. All right, 1 minute each. Go ahead.
I'm glad that Peter mentioned that Donald Trump moved the embassy to Israel's capital, to Jerusalem. 3 years after he did that, he said he did it for the evangelicals, which really, I think, exemplifies, again, what John Bolton has told us, and that is that Donald Trump's policy toward Israel is only driven by what's good for himself. It was at that time that we started to hear from him a great deal of animus toward the vast majority of American Jews, because he knows we don't support him. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, has aligned with our community throughout her career and has fought anti-Semitism going back to her time as district attorney. I saw this firsthand in the Senate. The first legislative action that she took in 2017 was a bipartisan resolution to condemn and end the rise of anti-Semitism, which we saw skyrocket at the beginning of the Trump administration. Also, she has repeatedly declared that when Jews are targeted because of their beliefs or identities, and when Israel singled out because of anti-Jewish hatred, It's anti-Semitism and it's unacceptable.
Time. All right, Congressman.
So let me respond to two things that Haley mentioned. The first is John Bolton. For anyone in this audience, anyone watching streaming, who's had people work for them and that person ended up being a disgruntled employee, we know what disgruntled employees say and do. So I take with a grain of salt his comments. The second thing is the original question is what has been done about anti-Semitism. Effectively, since October 7th, we have witnessed the worst anti-Semitism I'm aware of in American history, almost on a daily basis. The Vice President has done nothing in terms of campus anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, Democrats have really done nothing. President Trump, let's talk about what you do, not what you say. President Trump as president issued the extension of Title VI to the Civil Rights Act, which protects Jewish students in schools in the United States of America. It's the only thing that really does. It's the only protection that students have. The Republicans are the only entity, the House controlled by Republicans, has had 12 hearings on anti-Semitism, passed the bill. The Democratic Senate hasn't taken it up, hasn't had one hearing.
Thank you. All right. I think we have time for a few more questions. I will ask our timekeeper. I hope so.
Like,
Let's move it along.
we gotta wrap up. We gotta wrap up soon.
So, Council for Secure America, the organization I run, commissioned Jewish-Israeli polling this summer, which indicated 65% of Israelis were opposed to the two-state solution. This has been U.S. foreign policy for a very long time, which is support for the two-state solution. Palestinian polling, issued by Palestinian pollsters, has issued very, very strong indication that they too were not looking for a two-state solution and rejected the authority of a Palestinian authority. Looking at your candidates right now, how would they handle this policy issue going forward vis-a-vis the two-state solution if it directly contrasts with the voting populace of the state of Israel? Haley.
So Vice President Harris has been clear that while advocating for a ceasefire and seeing the hostages released, she also would like to see the fighting come to an end and see the continuation of humanitarian assistance. And she said so the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination. She's under no illusion that a two-state solution is happening anytime soon. It has been the U.S. policy of many subsequent administrations, Democrat and Republican, since the early 90s to advocate for a two-state solution. But we recognize this is not happening anytime soon. I think it's important that we also recognize her policy with regard to anti-Semitism, which I didn't get to finish, and that also includes the enactment and the implementation of an unprecedented strategy that was put forward by this White House before October 7th to counter anti-Semitism. It was informed by the work of the Second Gentleman and the Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt to take over 100 actions by this government, a whole-of-government approach, to do everything they can to counter anti-Semitism, and it was strengthened after October 7th as well. And the idea that John Bolton is just a disgruntled employee, I want to say, is actually, first of all, the fact of the matter is there are 24 members of the Trump administration, former advisors and allies, including Vice President Pence, both of his chief of staffs, his national security advisor, the list goes on, who are warning us, the American people, not to elect this man. That's not normal. That's not a disgruntled employee. You have the Vice President, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of Defense, the Chief of Staff, the Chief of Staff, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the former National Security Advisor, the Assistant to the Chief of Staff, the Chief of Staff. That's not normal. And it's not a disgruntled former employee.
Time. Okay, can we start from two?
When would you repeat the question?
Sure. I'm going to read it through so everybody hears the same thing. So recent polling, which was commissioned about Jewish-Israeli polling in Israel, was that 65% of Israelis were opposed to the two-state solution. Given that this has been U.S. foreign policy for a very long time on both sides of the aisle, how would your candidate reconcile with that, and would they move forward with a two-state solution? And just a point to add, Palestinian pollsters have indicated that they too, that Palestinians reject a two-state solution, as well as rejection of the Palestinian Authority.
So again, I think it's a fascinating thing going on right now that President Trump has received the support of a number of leading Muslims and Arabs who are Americans. including the mayor of the only majority Muslim city in the United States. And if you've seen it, it's a really, I think, fascinating perspective that they want the same thing that I'm asking for, which is really peace, which is what Donald Trump delivered during the 4 years of his administration. And when Donald Trump was president, he proposed a peace plan that included effectively a two-state solution. I think that any final status, regardless of the internal politics of Israel, if that's what's going to, if once there is a partner that can have peace, there will be a two-state solution, or there will be a peace process. But until we get to that point, and I think it's going to take Donald Trump to get to that point in time. I mean, he's been out of the box in terms of everything. Before he was elected the first time, he was accused we're going to have World War III if he gets elected. We obviously did not have World War III. And what he has said at this point in time, I think, unfortunately, the probability under an administration that is not willing to enforce American power and use American power brings weakness. I mean, you know, it is not beyond really analysis that we would not have either the war in the Ukraine or the war in the Middle East had he remained president.
Well, there's a lot more follow-up that we could do here, and we can go on for quite some time, and I have many questions to ask, but unfortunately, time is of the essence. So I'm going to turn right now to Congressman Deutsch to deliver his closing remarks, and then Haile will do the same, and we will unfortunately have to wrap this up, but I promise there are many more debates that are going to be going on with the two of them for another week, so you should stay tuned for that. Congressman, you have 3 minutes.
In a week from today, everyone in this room and everyone who is watching on the live stream will have an opportunity to vote for President of the United States. And the choice, and especially in places like Pennsylvania, your vote, we don't know if the election is going to be won by 1 vote, by 100 votes, or 1,000 votes. So I implore each of you to go through that thought process, and you'll come to your own conclusion, but I will repeat what I started with. To me, the most important job of the President of the United States is to achieve and maintain the peace in the world. And we can look, we have factual data. We had 4 years of Donald Trump as president, and we had peace, we had prosperity, we had no wars. We have had 4 years of the Harris-Biden administration, and what are the results? Where are we today? And I again mentioned on the practical side, in terms of the diametrically opposed positions that the two parties have regarding Iran and how to interact and deal with Iran. And because it's the emphasis and as a close, I think it is clear and as simple as what I mentioned, but I'm going to repeat it and just to emphasize it. You have one candidate who literally, absolutely, factually, has made decisions to give people who want to kill your family or literally have already killed members of your family and want to kill more members of your family and you. And this person has given them money, and that's what those people want to do. And you have another candidate that for 4 years protected your family, kept your family safe, and really protected and kept the world safe. And we could talk about a lot of other issues, but I really don't think the thought process should go much beyond that, and it doesn't have to. That is how stark the choices are. And when Donald Trump says that Jews that vote for Kamala Harris should have their head examined, I think they should not so much have their head examined, but they should think through the process of what I just said and think through it very clearly, very thoughtfully, and hopefully their choice will, and I expect their choice, will be for Donald Trump. Their vote, he'll be elected president again.
Thank you. Let's hold all clapping until the end. Good.
So Maya Angelou famously said that when someone tells you who they are, believe them the first time. Time and time again, Donald Trump has told us and shown us exactly who he is. A bigot, a felon, an extremist. He's indecent, he's immoral, and he has repeatedly said that he intends to be a dictator. In my opening, I mentioned that Peter and other Republicans encourage us to overlook what he has said and stands for, perhaps because of his alleged support of Israel. But my message to all of you tonight is that argument is not only flawed, but it's antithetical to our interests as well as those of Israel. In addition to his alignment with dictators and isolationists, Donald Trump's position on every issue, including Israel, are transactional and solely about himself. That is what his closest aides have repeatedly warned us about. And frankly, it's what he demonstrated on the debate stage when he said that Israel's future, its existence, is contingent on his election win. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, is a proven leader with a strong record of aligning with Jewish voters on every issue of importance in this election, starting with our democracy, our reproductive rights, and our freedoms, which 9 out of 10 Jewish Americans believe in, and Israel's security and right to self-defense. The U.S.-Israel relationship has endured 75 years, regardless of which party or person is in power here or in Israel. And no matter who wins this election, Israel's survival should never be in question, and certainly not by an aspiring dictator. We as Jews cannot afford 4 more years of Donald Trump with no guardrails, because those 24 former aides, the responsible ones, they wouldn't work for him. They're telling us all to vote against him. There will be no guardrails. The speakers at the Madison Square Garden rally, those will be his cabinet members. Tucker Carlson and now others. Steve Bannon was just let out of jail today. Maybe he'll get a job. But we cannot afford Donald Trump without the guardrails and with a 920-page plan to denigrate our democracy, Project 2025, written by 140 Trump advisors and former aides. And I encourage everyone to vote our values and support Kamala Harris in this election.
Okay, well, we made it through an hour. You did not thank our very esteemed panelists and debaters. I want to thank everyone for joining us. And more importantly, we made it. And really encourage everyone, hold on, civic duty to vote. And you guys, let's just end this in one piece. Thank you all for being here. We can all shake hands. And more importantly, encourage everyone to get out and vote, whoever you choose to support. Thank you, everyone.